All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Mike Norman Economics. You know, there are so many double standards when it comes to economics, and none that I find more insidious than those that are applied to the United States when you hear people commenting and talking about certain things, maybe things having to do with deficits, maybe in forecasts about the future exchange value of the US dollar and how deficits might affect that. But oftentimes, we hear this barrage of commentary, and it is taken or understood in one sense when it is applied to the United States, and then when we see it, for example, surface in terms of other countries that might be having similar circumstances, then suddenly it means something completely opposite. Maybe I'm confusing all of you, but I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. In the past year, we have seen, if you're a follower of foreign currency markets as I am, the Brazilian currency, the real, has been the strongest performing currency in the last year and is expected to be the strongest performing currency in the coming year. However, Brazil is deficit spending like crazy. And as a matter of fact, just recently, last week, the Brazilian President Lula announced that he had vetoed measures by his own government to curtail spending. In other words, Lula said, we're not going to do any of that curtailing of spending. If anything, we're going to increase spending. We're going to increase social supports for the poor and the working class. We are going to spend because that is what is going to help us to stimulate our economy. And indeed, the Brazilian economy is really turning around. It is growing strongly now. The stock market is bouncing back. And as I mentioned before, the currency is the strongest, has been the strongest performer in the currency markets and is expected to remain that way next year. Now, why is that a double standard? Well, it should be obvious because most, if not all, of the main critics of the United States and the bearish, the bears when it comes to the dollar would have you look at the massive, as they call it, amount of government spending here, and they construe that, or they will explain to you that all of that spending necessarily must lead to a decline in the exchange value of the dollar. However, when it applies to other countries, apparently it does not have this effect. Brazil, for some reason, mysteriously escapes the bearish influence of government spending on its currency. There is one example of the double standard. There's another double standard which has been in existence now for a decade or more. And that is the double standard when it comes to people talking about the growth in the size of the national debt of the United States, the public debt, which has gone from something like 7 trillion now projected to be up to around 11, perhaps 12 trillion. So maybe a 50-60% increase in the national debt. And the same people who focus in on this and have you or want you to believe that this is such a tremendously negative development that we are on the precipice, on the verge of collapsing as a result of this, interest rates spiking, a crashing down of the U.S. Treasury market, never tell you, for example, that over the course of the last 10 years, the national debt of Japan doubled. Not 50%, not 60%, 100%, a doubling in the size of their debt. Yet interest rates in Japan remain pretty much where they were a decade ago, just barely above zero. Currency has been stable. There has been no collapse, no crash. Now, of course, whenever you throw this up to the folks who would have you or want you to believe that our circumstances are different, they will say, well, in the case of Japan, it's this reason and it's that reason. And the fact of the matter is, that's all a sort of rationalization It is a way to attempt by them to explain away what they obviously are unable to explain or are unwilling to accept, I should say that. So the double standards are everywhere. We see them, if you have your eyes and your ears open, you can see them on a daily basis. The most recent one is the one I gave you up front. That was the case of Brazil, where huge amounts of government spending now are not only supporting the economy and causing the stock market to rebound and growth to resume, but having a very positive impact on the Brazilian currency. So next time you hear people talking about the U.S. debt and about all the government spending, which, by the way, is not that big in proportion to what we have seen from places like China, where the spending as a percent of GDP is far greater than the stimulus that we saw here in the United States. And by the way, even the recent run-up in spending here in the United States is still far below what we saw back in the 1940s when America was engaged in World War II. As a percentage of GDP, we got up to levels 35, almost 40% of GDP, whereas now we're talking about something in the order perhaps 12%, 13% of GDP. So next time you hear people talk about that, I mean, have them put it in context, or you do that for them. Because the longer we allow these double standards to go on, and we have allowed them to go on for a long time now, the greater the risk we run that it starts to infect our policy, and I think that's already happening, unfortunately. But education is a way, is a path to the light, out of the darkness. Just like back in the old dark ages when people believed in myth and superstition and ignorance prevailed. We follow the path of enlightenment and education on this channel. That's what we're all about. That's it for now. Looking forward to your comments. I'll see you soon. Take care.